Hello and welcome to The Shakedown. My name is Ryan Forbes, aka Rainforest. I am once again here by myself. Malone actually tried to join this week, but he is having some technical difficulties, which we are actually going to try and work out after this episode and see if we can get him on. So what's going on is this week I actually have off work, so I'm going to try and record a bunch of episodes all at once, and then I'll be schedule them to release over the next couple months is the goal. That's the goal. But we'll see what happens, and hopefully we'll have some with Malone, some on my own, some maybe with secret special guests. Maybe we'll see. And we'll see how that turns out and what we can come up with in the meantime. But for right now, we'll just do a quick little episode. I just wanted to talk about something that I'm dealing with right now, actually, and something that's kind of going on locally in Longmont. And actually, I think it applies to a lot of conversations that are going on in the country right now. So I'm a part of as marketing manager here at Longmont Public Media. I go on many different local Facebook groups and promote things that we have going on, and I get to hear and see what's going on. And something came up where somebody went up in front of city council and had a specific concern about sex offenders and about what should be done about them in general. And he did not, to me, when I was looking at it, he didn't have like a specific thing that he wanted done, but more other than having them, he did not like that they were not getting prison time and getting released onto work programs. And he also didn't feel like they were getting tracked enough. And this is a topic that I feel like it comes up a lot because I feel like sex offenders are like the easiest targets for, in general, across the prison system, across anytime anyone wants to talk about criminal justice. Sex offenders are a really easy target because their crimes are so heinous, and people's minds just saying the word sex offenders immediately goes to the worst possible places. And the first thing I'd like to talk about is the fact that sex offenders, and it's a wide range of categories. If you go out and get drunk and then go, pee in a public park, that is a sex offense because you've revealed yourself in a public place, as well as the most extreme indecency with a young child, on that end of the spectrum too. And it ranges, and they can be extremely horrible offenses. It's very difficult because it's such a wide-ranging category. And the one thing I want to say right off the bat is I don't want to excuse any of the actions, whether it is peeing in a park or it is something else out there. That's one thing I noticed about sex offenders in prison. A lot of people who have talked with them, they actually do that a lot, is that they go through and they try and they'll rank each other. So even like sex offenders are like the lowest of the low in prison, and their lives are generally in danger because of that. So a lot of times in Texas, even sex offenders can't go to maximum security units because they'll get killed. So they'll be in medium security. And then when they get into programs, when everyone knows that they're sex offenders, like everyone knows that everyone in that program is a sex offender, then they'll even rank each other in there. They'll be like, oh, well, I just, had indecency in a park. Oh, well, I just, I was, 18 and I had sex with a 15-year-old. Oh, well, and then they rank each other, and then it's the same thing. And then there's the worst of the worst, and categorizing each other like that, which is not helpful. It doesn't solve the problem. It doesn't help prevent future sex offenses, which I think is the most important thing that we need to do. That's, to me, if there's any one goal that our criminal justice system should have as a whole, it should be preventing the crime in the future. It's not saying this one person is the sole reason that this thing happens, because that's clearly not the case. If you lock up one person, you've just locked up that one person. You have not prevented, you haven't prevented this thing from happening again. And even when, like historically, if you look in criminology, if you try and argue, well, when you lock up a sex offender and you give them, life in prison, or you kill them, you can say, oh, well, that deters future sex offenders. No, it doesn't. No one who gets locked up for a crime looks at the history of what their crime was and goes, well, what's the penalty for it in this county or in this state or in this country? No one looks at it. That's not what they're thinking about when they're committing, when someone's committing deviant behavior. They are just thinking about what they want to get out of that deviant behavior at the moment, and whatever is leading up to that deviant behavior. And those are the things that are going to prevent that from happening in the future. Because if we can recognize what's causing those behaviors, then we can prevent it from happening in the future. And that's the thing that I feel like is the most important issue. So when we had a guy go in front of city council and he started saying, hey, we need to basically just give people longer sentences and be harder on them and track them more once they get out. Well, to me, that says two things. It's if you give them longer sentences, so like saying that you need longer sentences and tracking them more tells me right off the bat that giving them a longer sentence doesn't resolve the problem, because you need to track them more when they get out. If giving them a longer sentence did something to improve the situation, then what would happen is that you would get is that when they get out, you wouldn't need to track them because they would be better. You would resolve the issue and you wouldn't have to worry about them. Which again, and all of this, giving them longer sentences, tracking them when they get out, that is taxpayer money. That's taxpayer money to like feed children or to give these people who have been victims of sex offenses to pay for their treatment. We're taking it away from them and we're putting it towards the people that hurt them to do what? And in general, what it is to make them more harmful going forward, because people who go into prisons are more likely to recommit offenses. And that is the thing that I would like to point out it seems like our gut instinct when something happens, when we hear the word sex offender, what should we do with a sex offender, is lock them up, give them all a bunch of time. We don't really think about what that means. And what it means is that we're taking this person out. We're taking money out of our pockets to pay for it that could be spent on actually healing these other people. And we're also taking someone who was a taxpayer, an earner potentially, who could be actually still out paying taxes or giving the money that they make and also paying to heal their victims and paying to support them, which really should be a big part of it. And I don't understand why that's not a part of our criminal justice system. Like, the only way that the victims really get like this huge chunk of money, like any huge chunks of money, is if they go and take them through civil court along with the criminal court. And that's a big ask, because there's not a whole lot of attorneys that are both criminal and civil attorneys. You're one or the other. And the criminal process is so exhausting. I don't know why anyone would go through both unless they know that there's a huge chunk of money at the end. And people who are getting sexually assaulted they're not going to know how to do this, and they're not going to have the money to pay for a civil attorney and a criminal attorney and want to do all the legwork and have to be able to take the time off work to do any of these things or to think about any of these things. So, as I said, none of this, more time and tracking, it doesn't help the problem. The biggest thing is if we can get it to the point where not only are we rehabilitating the person while they're in there, we're able to track the problem and get them to a point where we can actually maybe slowly reintroduce them to society and feel comfortable with them being in there and being secure and that person being out there. The other part is if we can recognize the problem, we can also recognize when there's symptoms of it, either from that specific person or this would be huge, is if we can recognize it in someone else. If we can see it coming before it hits and we can tell people, hey, if you see this type of thing going on beforehand, then we know that you need to do this to prevent it. And it's probably going to end up being like ways to get people out of like social isolation, because a lot of antisocial behaviors tend to come from social isolation and figuring out ways around like to prevent that and to integrate people that end up socially isolated, which we just went through a pandemic where people were forced into social isolation. So there is a good chance there's a lot more of this to come in the, coming up in these coming years. So I will say what happened with me recently. So I was going through these groups. I came across this video of this guy, talking about, saying harsher sentences, more tracking. And I said basically what I'm saying now is that, that's not a solution. And I feel like what we need is a way to prevent sex offenses. And the response was not anything where they listened to what I was saying. It's one thing if they wanted to counter and say, well, that, I believe there's, punishment does prevent it by doing this or we need tracking for, and they could say that, we do need tracking no matter what, because it's such a heinous offense and we just don't know. We have to have tracking just no matter what. And those are arguments or points that could be pointed out, but that's not that was not the comeback. The comeback was next up was coming at my personality, saying, well, you don't have kids, or, well, it's like, well, that's your opinion. And it's not. That's not my appearance. That's my experience, and that's from me studying criminology, from looking at the research, from looking at the numbers. And you're free to look at it too. Tell me I'm wrong. Point it, show me in the direction. That's another thing everyone is welcome to do too. I'm eager to learn. I am always eager to learn. So, and this was a big learning experience from that, is how that reaction. And I feel like it's a hard, I know social media is not tend not to be the place to have debates, but I feel like it should be the place we should have debates. It should be, if that's the gathering place for people in general, well, then that should be the place where you have debates. Any place where I feel like anybody gathers, whether it's a party or social media or a bar or whatever, I want to talk these things out. I want to I don't want to sit there. I'm not going to let someone sit on information that is genuinely false is coming from a place where I believe is false. Now, I'm not going to immediately attack that person and come and say, well, you're stupid because blah, 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 or that's wrong because blah, blah. No, I'm just going to say, well, from my experience and from what I've read, it's this. And that's where I'm coming from. And it's been interesting to see that reaction, and it's very exhausting to try and combat that, because it's not a back and forth. It's especially in a group like that where the group that this topic came up in is very pro police, very pro sport, pro supporting the police, and like I've said before, it's not a matter of that I don't like the police. It's like there's a place for police in society, but police should be the last line of defense. That it's after you've tried everything else that you need to get someone. You need an officer involved with body armor and in a uniform and weapons and like anti-riot gear. That's the last. Everything else in the world has been tried, and now it's time to come to this point. And it's not something that it should be a regular integrated part of our society of like we should expect someone walking around with a gun and a holster on their hip could just walk up right next to me at any given moment. It's not. That's scary. that's a very scary thought. There's so many people who specialize in diffusing situations. There's mediators. There's social workers. There's counselors. There's all these people who specialize in and need that would love to be out there and doing the work. And we have here in Longmont, we have the core team that does specialize in it and works in it, and it's invaluable. Honestly, they're like we could use more of that. It's just a matter of we're just not there yet. So I feel like this has been very scattershot all over the place on this topic. But the point of this is just saying that we've talked about the value of prisons and that there's not necessarily a value in it. But I think the bigger point of it is like the lock 'em up attitude. I really feel like this is another example of that, of how dangerous the lock 'em up attitude can be, even when it comes to the most heinous of the heinous. And I feel like when we talk about sex offenders and when we talk about inmates on death row, a lot of times it really gets out of hand, and we really don't see the forest for the trees on it. And maybe I didn't need to get involved in that conversation. Maybe what needed to happen was I needed to start a new conversation somewhere else about how we can we could do away with prison on just do less away with get rid of prison on lower and lower, on more offenses. One thing I constantly advocate for too is restorative justice. Not just for children. It's not just, you don't need, restorative justice goes well beyond just youth offenders, because what happens in a restorative justice setting is that it's not just that you can actually come to a conversation with the person who committed the offense and the person who was hurt by the offense and bring them together and come to some resolution. That it also makes it so that they can come to a resolution and then bypass that person, who's usually a juvenile, from ever getting a criminal record, which is huge. Having a criminal record is a huge hindrance. You lose a huge chunk of your freedom just by having the criminal record. And it puts a target on you. And one day I would like to go and try and get my record expunged, but I'm still on paper. That's not something that's going to be able to be done while I'm on it. Right now, I'm just trying to get it so that I can basically get my, just get my commitment done, which that was last week's episode was about commitments. And I just want to get that commuted at the very least. And that in itself is a challenge. It's money and challenge. And money, and this, once again, anytime I talk about me spending money on a lawyer or anything like that, all of that is money I'd much rather have spent on my victim. But that's, once again, that's not neither here nor there. It can't. As long as it is like it is, that's not how it goes. I have my victim, and for those of you who, haven't caught up with the rest of the podcast, is I killed someone in a car crash that I caused, and um, and he had family and friends and all these people who were devastated by it, and they could have used that money. They could have used all that money. They could have used the money I paid for a lawyer to keep for my sentencing, which that lawyer, like, I mean, that was the worst, like, $175,000 I've ever spent. I'd much rather have spent that on the victim's family, give for the funeral, for all that stuff. It's not that they didn't get money from my insurance or anything, but it's like so much more. I mean, as far as where money should have gone and been deserving, and just overall helping people, I feel like it's crazy to think about it. And it comes from, we don't think about what it means when we just say lock them up. We just say lock them up because it just seems like that's the only option we're given. It's like, if you do something bad, lock them up. If if we don't like that person, lock them up. But you're paying for it. I mean, if for every person who said lock him up, we actually came by and asked for the money to pay for that person's cell, and we went through what they're actually paying for too, and said, you're paying for their food, you're paying for their water, you're paying for all the officers' time, you're paying for people to run commissary, you're paying for people to people to maintain the prison, you're paying for more prisons to open up so that we can hold all these people you want to lock up. You're paying over all of that and way more. You're paying for the pig farms that we're going to have the inmates working in. All of that and more. There's a ton, and it's crazy to think about it. And that's just all from that lock them up. So I think that is, I think we're going to call it right about there. If anyone, if anybody has any topics or anything that they would like to hear about on the show, please feel free to email me at ryan@shakedown.show. We are going to try and get Malone on here. That's what I'm going to do right now after this, and see what we can do as far as getting Malone working. That is another thing I want to say. If anyone is down in Houston, in the Houston area, or can come down and help Malone operate his devices, or bring some device that he can work with, or transport him to another public media space or maker space like this one, like this beautiful public media maker space, and so that we can coordinate better on doing the podcast, that would be great. We would love that support, and anything like that. That'd be great. Also, if anyone has any other recommendations for the podcast, this is the time right now, we're looking, you'll see a bunch of different versions of this podcast probably over the couple months, because I'm going to try a whole bunch of different things. I just tried some different lighting in here today. We'll probably try some more different things. I'm probably going to if I can remember, I'll bring my mood lighting thing and see how that looks in here. But we're going to try a bunch of different things, probably try a bunch of different setups, and we'll see what works best. And hopefully we'll have a bunch of different varieties of shows. And seriously, any questions you have, if you guys want to email them, I'm happy to answer your questions. And we'll try and get Malone. If they're Malone questions, we will make sure he gets on the show and answer the questions. And even if we can't get him visually, because he's locked up for 30 years, folks. He's 30 years. Imagine that, 30 years. Think about what computers were like 30 years ago. 30 years ago, this didn't exist 30 years ago. All right. Nothing like this existed 30 years ago. Okay. And by the goodness of other people's hearts, he has a 5-year-old smartphone That's what he's dealing with. All right. And I got him an iPad, and he has managed to lock himself out of it. And who knows what else with it. So please, that's what I'm asking for at the end of this episode. Please help Malone. All right. Go help him. And hopefully he'll be back next week. And thank you guys so much. The Shakedown was produced at Longmont Public Media. And our theme song, Shakedown, was brought to you by Envato Elements. If you want any Shakedown merchandise, or you want to support the show, you can go to waywordpress.com. That's WAYWORD press.com.